Good morning, internets. This is just a quick update for getting into the weekly or so lecture or whatever it is that I present. On the translation project, I'm just finished the first section, so I'm about halfway or so through the first chapter, which has been a rather interesting little tidbit, as essentially the first section, called Defining Hojojutsu, is basically covering some of the categorizations and such of, well, Hojojutsu. So it's looking at a little bit on the nature of what it is, some of the different terms used to describe it from various sources, a little bit of the history of it, and some of the categorizations, such as which groupings, individuals, or cast members would be tied which way. Whether you're a monk, you'd be tied one way, you're a samurai, you'd be tied another, a peasant a third, criminal, so on and so forth. And on top of that, you'd be bound in specific ways according to the severity of the crime you've committed, what profession you're in, and what caste you're in, out of the four-tier caste system of classical Japan. So yeah, that's rather interesting, and it's a neat little section. I enjoyed doing up that part because it's basically got everything in lists, and frankly I find it both easy and interesting to see, firstly to translate, and then to see how these things were categorized. When it's put into like a visual format, like a table or something, it makes for, you know, something different to look at, something to consider differently. Yeah, so the first section of chapter 1 is complete. In addition, there's of course a couple other traditions in the book that I've covered, and or translated rather, and I'll be polishing those up as they come along. And that's pretty much it on the translation side of things. So now I'll be talking about what's called the Kaginawa. It's like the hooked rope. So it's basically just a rope with a hook on it. And that's kind of interesting because it brings a little bit of an edge to what's otherwise perceived as a rather soft thing. You're dealing with a soft item, soft flexible item, and now there's a big metal hook on the end of it. So it kind of, yeah, it kind of makes things a bit more serious. I haven't seen too many people use it, but the diagrams and such in Zukai Hojojutsu is rather interesting, so I'll just talk about that a little bit. Alright, so here we are on the lecture part of this video. I thought I'd split it into two sections this time around, just to kind of give it, you know, a nice division. So yeah, the section of, or the subject of this lecture is on the Kaginawa, the hooked rope. So here we have good old-fashioned asanawa. Actually, a little tidbit here, it's hidden right now, but the end of this rope, instead of my usual whipping method, I tied an overhand knot in it just to keep the ends from fraying and splitting the whole rope apart. The reason for this was about a week ago I did a short demonstration on Hojojutsu and related rope techniques, and this was fresh out of the package. I got 2 lines fresh out of the package. And instead of taking the time to whip them up, like I didn't have any of the twine I usually use for this, I just tied overhand knots in this. Many of my friends prefer to do that because if you're using 2 lines of rope for some reason, if you're using 2 shorter lengths of rope, you can tie knots in that and use a particular knot to lengthen the entire rope by tying the 2 together, and they kind of hook at the overhand knots. So I don't personally do that because I use rather long rope to begin with, but some people prefer like 10 feet, and then if they want 20 feet they add to it. Worst, I use 28 to 30 feet myself. So yeah, and this is unconditioned as it is now. It's not all really fine and soft, it's still quite coarse and flaky. But sometimes it's nice to handle this as opposed to stuff that's well worn in, just to, you know, bring you back into the picture, remind you you're alive. Alright, so asanawa, and I'll post pictures of this at the end of the video, or I'll just inject them in. But this is the hook, the kagi. Kagi is essentially just Japanese for like metal hook. Some of the densho describe it as being copper or bronze. Some specify iron. In this case, it's a sort of stainless steel. It's not okay. In my area, it's not particularly easy to get a hold of these. I was just looking. This one's made in Malaysia. It's not too easy to get a hold of these in my area. I ended up visiting all the hardware shops. There was nothing that was suitable to what I was looking for. I ended up having to go to a piercing shop, like a tattoo and piercing parlor, and I asked around for that. And after going to 8 different tattoo areas or tattoo shops in this area, I found one place. And because this is used for another practice similar to piercing, and it's not exactly something beginners should be using, they're very hesitant to sell it to me. They actually gave me some that were poorly, some that are actually tarnished. They weren't properly polished. And yeah, I think the guy asked for like $5 for 2, so I mean, I walked away with something decent. I wouldn't actually use this on people because, again, it's not properly polished. So you can be looking at anything from infections to lockjaw if used improperly. If for some reason it penetrates the individual. So I did manage to get a hold of these, but I mean, you know, the guy doesn't want me to tell anyone where he got them from, because, well, what if I practice piercing with someone and I hurt them, and you know, it all comes back to him. So there's an element of liability there. Long story short, the too long didn't read version. This can be a pain in the butt to get a hold of, depending on your area and who you know. I personally don't use these on people, not in any kind of penetrative way, simply because it makes a mess. It hurts them. That's not really the goal of my game. For me, it's learning. That's it. Alright? So, where I'm getting the content for this from is one of the middle chapters in Fujita Seiko's Zukai Hojojutsu, or Hojojutsu. It's in pages 144 to 150. The heading is Namba Kazumoto-ryu and Azuma-ryu. Of course, the window's open because it's sweltering in here, so the traffic's going to be nice and noisy. So yes, Azuma-ryu and Namba Kazumoto-ryu. For the sake of ease of tongue, if I reference one of the traditions again, it's only going to be Azuma-ryu. The other one's just such a mouthful. Early in the chapter, they've got this cool little diagram labeled simply Kyusho, which is like Japanese for like a vital point or a pressure point, as we know it in the martial arts. So basically, specific places to hit the human body. According to the diagram, there's 9 places on the body, 3 in the lower level, 3 in the midsection, and 3 in the upper level, where you can essentially hook or take the kagi and hook it into the body without seriously injuring the individual. I mean, by today's standards, having a hook in you anywhere is considered pretty serious injury, but classically, in a world where there are swords and spears and cannons and such, this isn't considered lethal. It's not considered so much of a big deal. Alright, so I'm not going to point out the specific places. That'll be in the book. But I just wanted to point out that they use the term Kyusho specifically, and they do specify in a rather nice diagram the 9 places on the body for hooking this. It also emphasizes that it's a method used to bind individuals under the influence of sake, which I thought was kind of amusing, because you'd think, drunk or otherwise, it's kind of a pain in the butt to wrestle against rope, but I'm thinking just to kind of up the ante when grappling with a drunken individual, you stick that hook in them, they're probably coming with you one way or another. Whether they feel it or not, it's going to tug them in a different way. Alright? Similarly, the hook, there's another diagram there where the hook is shown to hook into the cheek, like kind of like a fishhook method, like that. Not necessarily hooking through the cheek, but just hooking the cheek itself. And then the rope would be wrapped around the body, and the individual would be bound as typical in Hojojutsu. The other one is with individuals that have top knots. The hair on the sides of the head are actually pulled tight when the hair is pulled back, and so the diagram shows the hook being tucked into the top knot, or the hair, which I thought was kind of interesting. Prior to that diagram, I had never seen anything like that, or even thought of it. So that's kind of cool and interesting. Now the method for this particular style of hook anyways, we'd be using the Hibari nut, which I know it's probably getting kind of redundant now, but they use Hibari for many things. I use Hibari for many things. So, and I'll post a picture of that. Boom. Right? So it's hooked on just like that. Now, one of the benefits of this is simply to be another method of replacing Hibari as it's used in Hojojutsu, or to replace the slip knot, right? Because this can hook itself, and then you've got yourself, oops, a little bit hard without wrapping this around someone, and you've got yourself a makeshift slip knot. Alright. So for example, if we were to pretend this is someone's rather small neck, you could hook the rope around like that. Right? So it's just on there. It's kind of a serious thing. And then just like with the metal ring I was using, Kaginawa, you can use it to change the direction of the rope in a tie. Whereas conventionally you just use the musubi, or the Hibari musubi knot, and go from there. So that's that really. Can't think of much else. You can use it. You can hook it into clothing, of course. Depending on the type and material of clothing, it might be able to hold on to it. Maybe just hook the lapel or of the shirt. Otherwise, if you tear it into fabric and it makes a hole, it's probably going to rip quite easily from there. But yeah, so in any case, I found this to be a rather interesting little accessory when it came to the practice of Hojojutsu. Something you don't often see, something that's talked about occasionally, but in the end, rather interesting, right? So that's about all I can say about that. I hope that was interesting and informative, and without further ado, I'll keep you guys updated. Cheers.